Hi everybody. Today marks the beginning of Unit 4, Age-Appropriate Learning Experiences and Materials. And so the way this works is each week we're going to look at a different aspect of the fine arts, and on the first day we're going to cover the content so you have a basis to understand what you're doing. And then the second day of the week we're going to have a lab where we're going to practice what we learned. So this week we are going to be starting with art. So let's get started. This recording will not be more than 15 minutes long. Okay, these are some alignments you can look at to get more information. And before we start anything, it's important to understand what developmentally appropriate practice is, DAP. It's important to read all of this, but I've got to break it down for you a little bit. So knowing about child development and learning is what we just went over, the standards, milestones of child development, Virginia Foundation blocks, Virginia SOLs. It's important to know what is typical, what we should expect for a specific age group. This is, of course, as you learned, based on research, and it helps us kind of figure out, is this appropriate? Can children do this, or is it challenging enough? Right, next is knowing what's individually appropriate, because maybe what's appropriate according to the standards is not going to be the same for a specific child. As you're going to learn in other classes, there's many factors that contribute to this. For example, if a child is not exposed to scissors at all at home, if they're not allowed to and they're taught that's a bad thing, then using scissors at a specific age where physically they can do it might be a little more challenging for this child because they just have less exposure to it. So that's very important to consider. And lastly, knowing what's culturally important. We've got to make sure we understand each child's culture, and this might include traditions, values, beliefs, language. So an example of language is if a child speaks a different language, then we need to either use picture cards or learn some basic words of whatever activity it is in their language. Maybe the child, let's say, here's an example on values. Many teachers use rice in their sensory table, rice table, which is great, for the most part, but a lot of families from the Asian culture see that as wasteful, and that's their main source of food, so it's a derogatory thing to play with it. So being aware of what's culturally important to your families is also a part of developmentally appropriate practice. Okay, and this part we're going to get to what it looks like in art. So in your lesson plan, you're going to have to you're going to have to list what concepts you're teaching. Concepts, think of them as kind of like hashtags on Twitter. They're just basic keywords of what a child is learning. So these are the basic ones that the text outlines. I'm not going to read them to you. You don't need me to read them, but you do need to be aware of these because you're going to come back to these as you're planning your lessons. What I've done is given you some examples of art activities that teach these concepts. So to teach the concept of line, letting children dip cones and paint and make lines up and down their paper, or painting with yarn, dragging the yarn across the paper to make lines, gluing yarn, children using toothpicks and clay, meaning making little balls of clay and attaching sticks to kind of make 3D figures. Think of like a science project neuron or something. All right, your next one is color, and this is really easy to do, but some of my favorites are mixing watercolors with eyedroppers. So maybe just having 3 cups of water that are each dyed a different primary color, and then letting children use eyedroppers, or as I like to say, the children's medicine, what is it called? The things that like pharmacies give you to give medicine to children, syringes, you can get those for free and they do the same thing. And taking a little bit of yellow and a little bit of blue and mixing it in a different cup to see that it makes green. Mixing colors when their hands are covered with paint. So a red a hand covered in red paint and a hand covered in yellow paint. Mixing it together, when you rub them, it makes orange. Mixing Play-Doh, if you give them different colors of homemade Play-Doh, which we are going to, I'll show you how to do. And seeing how they make a new color. Working with shades and tints, working with adding white to different colors to make them lighter, and black or brown to make them darker. So there's so many things. All right, moving on, shape. You can paint, print with anything. For example, sometimes I would just go to my manipulative center and just grab some Legos and put those in paint and print with them, kind of like stamps. There's so many cool things to do, and I will have a lot of that available in our lab on the next class day. Making stamps. So I would use wine corks and put different objects on them. Like, for instance, I would glue half a jelly bean on it to make jelly bean stamps. And weaving is really cool. It's just basically having a frame, like a picture frame, and having children weave. You have strings going across it and having them weave ribbon, or they can weave ribbon through the fence outside. All right, moving on, mass or volume. This is basically, think of it as weight. So anything three-dimensional they do, any kind of clay or figurine they make, mobiles, which is basically hanging stuff from a hanger, a clothing hanger. Making models. I love plaster of Paris, which is a powder you can mix with water, and in about 10 or 15 minutes it sets to be like cement, concrete. So I would mix this and then go outside with my kids and do a nature walk, and they would collect things, and by the time we came in, it was somewhat hardened, and they could stick their pine cones and leaves and sticks in there, and then it would fully dry, and you could take it out of the paper or styrofoam bowl you had it, and you have a really nice little model. It's wonderful. We did it for like every season. All right, so moving on, design or composition. That's what the finished product is. So it's when a child actually plans what they're going to create, when they say, I'm going to do this, and then they do it. Pattern is also very simple, just paint printing, having children paint, for instance, with Q-tips, giving them Q-tips and having them paint a red, blue pattern. All kinds of stuff, gluing lines or shapes, in a certain pattern, or stringing patterns with beads or macaroni. I'm also going to have that available where children can, it's really easy to dye macaroni and make them like beads, or actually have real beads, and you can make a pattern like that. Space, it's basically mixing positive with negative. And when I say that, think about back in the day, you may have done silhouettes of like the presidents where it's just their shadow. So you have like a black face with a white background. That's what positive and negative is. Or maybe it's cutting out, say have it on a piece of paper and cutting out a heart in the middle of it. That's positive and negative. This is basically gluing things together. So instead of cutting out a heart, maybe taking a heart-shaped piece of paper and gluing it to another piece. That is the concept of space. And stencils is another good use of teaching the concept of space. All right, balance is just proportion. Having, for instance, folding a piece of paper in half and then doing their handprint on one side, folding it back in half, and see how it goes on the other side. All right, and if you're wondering why I'm going so fast, it's because I'm trying to record a shorter video to hold your attention span. So you can always go back and pause this to get the notes and take them. You can actually pause it while I'm going, and that way you can get the notes down. I highly recommend taking notes. All right, so next one, this is the last one, is texture. So collages are a great way to do texture. Just have tons of different things for children to pick from that just they can glue down. Pom-poms, pipe cleaners, yarn, eyeballs, the glue on eyeballs. I mean, just stuff around your house, honestly, sand. Wrapping paper, newspaper, magazine paper, just anything they can glue down. Texture rubbings are cool, where they take a piece of paper and put it on top of things. It might be change, like pennies and nickels. It might be sandpaper. It can be tons of things. One time I had my children doing it with cinder blocks. They would put the piece of paper on top of a cinder block and rub it to see the texture. So there's all kinds of things you can do with that. And then lastly, printing with different textures. So putting sandpaper, putting a piece into like a large tray of paint and then putting the sandpaper on top of a piece of paper, or doing the same thing with bubble wrap. And I will have bubble wrap available so we can do this. All right, next one. This is really, really important for you to get. Teachable Moments. If you are in the current edition of the art book, which is the 8th edition, you will see it on page 213, but this is so important for you to know. Teachable moments are unplanned events that open the door to an activity and a burst of learning. So an example would be maybe a child sees this ladybug outside and they're so excited about it and they're like, look, look, look what I found. And then you go inside and say, hey, do you think you can create that ladybug in the art center? You don't say, do you think you could paint? Maybe they want to color, maybe they want to paint, maybe they want to use colored pencils, but you can see how these children created their depictions of a ladybug. So that's a teachable moment. It wasn't planned when they were outside, but the teacher was very intentional about seeing their interest and turning that into an opportunity to learn. So you have to look at that. All right, the last part, we're going to just look at age-appropriate materials for each of the different age groups. So for infants and toddlers, they need lots of sensory-rich stuff. Fabrics, squishy stuff, soft stuff, hard stuff, scratchy stuff. This is really important, and a lot of people think, oh my gosh, they shouldn't be making messes, but this is how our 1 and 2 year olds learn. Our infants and 1s and 2s, they need sensory. You see this baby up top playing with Play-Doh, they need that just supervised. They need chubby fat crayons. They can have paper and paint. Put an infant, an older infant in a high chair and let them finger paint. Give them paintbrushes. Toddlers, our 1s and 2s, can use child-safe scissors. They can use Play-Doh, cookie cutters, rollers. They can use bingo dollars, which you see at the bottom here on the right. You can get them like the dollar store. Okay. Our older kids, our preschoolers, have lots and lots and lots of stuff. You'll see, we're going to go over this a little later once we talk about quality environments, but according to the environmental rating scale, they need 3 to 5 different items in each of these categories: painting materials, drawing, 3D, collage, and art. So I am not going to read those to you because you can read them on your own, of course, but I do want you to read those and make sure you understand what each of those material categories looks like. And lastly, we have the primary grades, which is kindergarten and up, and they can use just about anything, but they're more capable of using clay because it's harder and they have better fine motor control. Oil pastels is something they can use to mix around the colors. Sometimes I would use those with my 4-year-olds. Weaving fabrics together, they're able to do. For me, I used to make the homemade pot holders with the loom as a kid. That's kind of the same thing. If you're over 30, you probably remember that. If you're not, you can Google it. And then finally, the last thing I have for you is the 1/3 rule, also on page 213 in the 8th edition. The general guideline to follow during the day is 1/3 of the day should be free time, where they could pick whatever they want. And then part of it should be whole group, like circle time, lunch, being outside, things like that, nap time. And then 1/3 of the day should be where they can have small group time, not forced on it, but where you can work with just a few kids at a time to help develop their skills and see where they are individually. All right, so that's all I have for today. I hope this was helpful for you, and this is going to prepare you for our lab when you come back to class. All right, have a good one, guys.